Hey, everybody, this is Kelvin Red. I want to welcome you to Leadership Matters. Yes, it is a double entendre. Why? Because leadership matters, and we do have leadership matters that need to be dealt with. Now, the purpose of this program is that every 2 weeks, I want to come on and introduce you to someone who I think is doing some fabulous work in the world of leadership. I've been very fortunate traveling around this country, having friends who are clients, and they're doing remarkable things. And some of them are doing great things in small towns and nobody knows about them. And I want to bring them to you. Now, this is not so much of a bio as it is a leadership lesson. Okay. So what I really want you to be able to take from this are the lessons that they're going to provide for each and every one of us as they bestow upon us the things that they have learned, who they are, and how they impact leadership. So without further ado, I want to bring on our guest this week, and that is Don Avery, President and CEO of Fairview Park Hospital in Dublin, Georgia. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Kelvin. I appreciate it. Thanks for
Well,
having me
I appreciate you taking the time to come on to Leadership Matters and talk about leadership. But in a way that I want to do this today, I want to kind of take us a brief journey of your early years to the person that you are now and how you were shaped. So if you will, please tell us a little bit about your wonder years, so to speak, and where did you grow up?
Well, I'm a product of the Midwest. I grew up in Illinois, Peoria, Illinois, to be exact. We call it the heart of Illinois. A lot of people ask me where that is, and I'll just say it's outside of Chicago. Like everything's outside of Chicago, but I'm raised by my mom and dad. I've got three sisters. I'm number two in that. Grew up in what I would call back then, a typical town in the 60s and 70s when I grew up. Graduated from high school in the 70s and college in the late 70s. And so that whole Midwest culture, I guess, had an influence on me. My father's a World War II vet, so that had something to do with probably shaping me. I was active in sports and Boy Scouts and that sort of thing. And a lot of that probably did serve to shaping some leadership skills, maybe tendencies early on, both through athletics.
Speaking of that, I'm curious, as a teenager, like you're 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, did you ever in your wildest dreams think that you would be doing what you're doing right now?
No. I guess growing up as a kid, our hobby, particularly my dad and I, we did Boy Scouts, but we did flying. My dad was a pilot. My grandfather was a pilot. My great uncle was a pilot. So my family's been involved with aviation. And so I think I grew up wanting to be a pilot, not knowing exactly what that would look like, but I guess I figured I'd be a commercial pilot perhaps. Again, I think I probably always thought, even from that age, that I'd be somehow involved in leadership because of Boy Scouts probably. And with some of the things I did in school, extracurricular activities, I kind of tended towards that because I was more outgoing and extroverted and such. But
and you still are.
I still am.
Okay.
And so flying became a part of my life as a kid. My first flight in an airplane was when my mom was pregnant with me. That was the first time I was in a private plane. And then growing up, we flew a lot on weekends. We hung out at the airport. That was, in the South, people go hunting and fishing, and my family went out to the airport and hung out with other guys that flew.
I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I do remember a couple of years ago, my wife and I were down in Panama City, and we were in Walmart one evening, and lo and behold, there's Don. And the first words out of your mouth was, I just flew down here, and my wife will be a little bit later, but I just flew down here, and I thought, well, that must be really, really neat.
Well, it is. And maybe I take that for granted, but I think everybody's got different hobbies, different things that really bring them a lot of satisfaction and joy. And aviation's always been an outlet for me. And it's also a means of transportation. Sometimes it allows me to do some things because I can get from point A to point B so much faster. But it has certainly been a big part of my life.
Well, take us on this journey from the time you left high school to once you got out of college, because you attended the Air Force Academy.
I did. I was on a Boy Scout trip when I was in high school out west to a place called Philmont Scout Ranch. And from Illinois, you have to go through Denver to get to New Mexico. And on that trip, we stopped at the Air Force Academy for a few hours to visit there. And it really, really impacted me. And I came home from that 3-week trip and told my dad I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. And I didn't know all that meant at the time, but certainly learned about that. And so I started as a freshman at the academy. I was 17 and very immature. And that experience really resonated with me. I really, it seemed to be a right place for me. And almost instantly you get involved with leadership roles.
Yes.
And as a freshman, you get limited experience with that, but the longer you're there, they produce leaders. People ask me what I majored in, and my degree may be in accounting and finance, but what I say is I majored in leadership because there's so many opportunities to do that. Military leadership and academic leadership, sports, but you're put in various leadership roles throughout your time there. And when I graduated, I went to the Air Force, an Air Force base in Arizona for pilot training. Became a pilot. It's a 1-year program, and then from there, I was stationed as a pilot in Panama City, Florida, Tyndall Air Force Base. So
you mean the pilot program is only 1 year?
It is. You take a course at the academy. If you're going to pilot training at the Air Force Academy, we take a class just a semester long, and I actually didn't have to take that because I already had a pilot's license, and so I was exempt from taking that. I had a pilot's license when I was a teenager. And so when I went to pilot training, in many ways, I had a leg up just because I knew the basics of flying. And whether you're flying a jet or a prop or a big or small airplane, the physics are the same. So.
Well, I think it's probably taken me a little bit more than a year, but I did not know that. I've known you for so long, and I did not know that you had your pilot's license as a teenager. So that's really impressive. So I'm curious about something. Why hospital administration?
Well, shortly after I got stationed at Tyndall in Panama City, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had some lumps in my neck here, and they determined and did some biopsies and such, and I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so for the next 2 years, I was grounded from flying. I was in the hospital for about 9 months with treatment. And then I was recovering for over a year after that. I eventually got back on flying status, but that experience as a patient just got me to thinking about other options, because there was a very strong possibility that the Air Force was going to give me a medical retirement. Back in the 80s, most cancer patients, most pilots who got cancer did not continue flying. I was fortunate. I was one of the first that got back on flying status. Today, that's probably more the rule than the exception, just because we've come so far in cancer treatment and such. But it really opened up a door to me that combined my interest in maybe some skill sets in accounting and finance and in business, if you will, and with leadership. And then also, as in my experience as a patient, I think that has influenced and informed my career and my job every day over the past 30 years. Having been a patient, having gone through cancer treatment, having had the testing that was done and the surgery and the treatments and such, gave me an insight into what it's like to be a patient, but it also gave me insight into what it's like to be an employee, because I got to know the employees in so many ways: nursing and radiology and laboratory and therapy, and even the ER. A couple times I had to come to the hospital through the ER. So I learned a lot about the employees. As you know, I ask a lot of questions. I get to know people, and so I learned a lot from those employees, those frontline employees, and what it was like to work in a hospital. I also asked them a lot of what they liked and didn't like about the leaders in their hospital. So I learned a lot even before I went to graduate school.
Well, I'm a huge believer that success leaves clues, and I think that's a great segue into the real meat of what I really like to talk about with my guests, and that is, let's talk about our most recent experience, and I'm going to say our because we've all experienced this pandemic in various ways, and I really enjoyed talking to you last week about how your leadership experience has played a role in you leading Fairview Park Hospital during this pandemic. And one of the things that really, really got to me, and I was so impressed with you last year, I saw you come on Facebook and give a lot of Facebook interviews on the pandemic and how it was impacting the hospital, the city of Dublin, the people there. Talk to us about that. Why did you decide to go out and communicate in this form and fashion?
Well, nobody living has ever been through a pandemic before. Yeah. And so we're all learning on the fly. And as you well know, there was a tremendous amount of not just uncertainty, but fear in our nation, in the world, over this pandemic. There were a much higher number of people being hospitalized, people dying, people not just that had, other issues, other health issues, comorbidities, but people that were otherwise healthy and got this coronavirus disease and died. And I think there was tremendous amount of fear. And I've always been a fairly transparent person. And I think that there's a real benefit to communicating. And I think it was important to communicate not just the things we knew, but to let people know the things we didn't know, to give in information and instruction. I met with the city council, the county commission. I met with a lot of local business leaders, in some cases one-on-one, in some cases online, because we couldn't do a lot of things in person. And I felt that the best thing that we could do as a hospital is to keep our community informed. And so, I was interviewed a lot by TV stations, both local here in Dublin and a couple of TV stations in Macon, in the newspapers. I was even interviewed by a couple of, statewide media outlets. And the reason I made myself available for that is, again, to keep people as current and updated as possible. We used social media in ways that we haven't used it in the past. We also communicated internally. We communicate regularly with our board, with our medical staff, with our employees. And that was in various forms. Some of it was using social media. Some of it was just rounding. We couldn't get together in big groups during that time. We did a lot of conference calls and WebEx and Zooms and things like that. But I do think it's important, and this is just leadership, is keep your people informed. Be honest with them. Be transparent with them. Let them know the things you know, the things you don't know. It's okay to let them know you're hurting as well, and show them that you care. You build trust that way. You build, I think, camaraderie and a culture that helps us, especially in a time like that, get through it. We prepare for hurricanes every year and other natural disasters during the hurricane season or tornado season or whatever. And this was that on steroids. It's been an 18-month pandemic, not just an 8 or 10 day issue. So in a lot of ways, we applied things we've learned in other situations to a pandemic, but we learned daily and weekly. We were learning and letting other people know as we learned.
Well, let me ask you, you touched on something. Okay, so during that time period, and even now to a degree, there's so much we did not know. And then in so many levels, there was a lot of panic based on what we did know, what we didn't know. There was, tension, anxiety. How do you, as a CEO, how did you keep your calm?
Well, probably a lot of ways. One is I kept informed as much as I could. I continued to be visible and listen. I tried to listen more than talk, and I like to talk, but really listen to the employees. There were times when I might have been frustrated or struggled, or there were times when, I cried on behalf of my employees. I prayed with my employees during this time. My faith certainly has always been a part of my life. And
Hold it. I want to pause there real quick because people look at you. I know you. I've known you for a long time. I know your employees. People look at you and they say, Don, you really took it to heart that much? I mean, because you told me in the interview last week when we were pre-interview that there were times you broke down.
Well, I remember several times I felt this burden for my employees, for my extended family, and I saw they were struggling. I can remember a Sunday afternoon. I was up here at the hospital, and there were two different codes that happened, and they had to put all their PPE on, and that takes a minute to do all that, and then they had to go in and respond to this emergency, and they did. That's what they were trained to do. But the burden and the pressure of going into a COVID patient who was coding, protecting yourself, taking care of them. And I felt in many times helpless that I couldn't do anything to help. We had an employee who was a patient, one of the first COVID patients, and on 3 or 4 occasions, she almost died. She was in the ICU. She was on a vent for almost 3 weeks. And the fact that she literally walked out of here was really a miracle. And I had 2 or 3 different opportunities to literally pray with a group of employees over that patient outside their room. Their parents were on a FaceTime with us. And so they were a part of that. And I wear that. That's it. I mean, I talk about our family. I guess if this is the family, then I'm the dad. But these are people I care deeply about, that I love. And to a certain degree, their pain and their stress, I feel. But I also feel like it's important as a leader in that transparency to also not be flustered, not be, frustrated, not be, panicky or whatever. And that's not my nature anyway. But I've been through a lot of very difficult times in my life, and some of those. And even that prepares you to be calmer in a storm. And I just tend to be that way. I've had emergencies as a pilot, and you have to be calm in handling those. I had a granddaughter fall into a pool, and I just went into slow motion, and I was calm during all of that to make sure we got her out of the water and everything. And then later you panic, but in the storm, you have to remain calm. And fortunately, I've been able to do that. But I know that it was real. But in many respects, during the pandemic, it was really leadership at its finest point. And I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to lead during this time. And I think any leader ought to want to lead in a crisis, ought to want to lead during a stressful time. It's easy to lead when everything's going great. And I think we get a chance to truly lead and to use your double entendre. The leadership matters. It particularly matters in a crisis. It particularly matters during times of great difficulty and stress. And we ought to rise to the occasion.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I want to have this program is to educate those people, particularly the new leaders, because one of the things I've often said, and I know you love sports too, everybody likes being on the field when the band is playing, you're up by 15, 20 points, and everybody's cheering your name. But when you're on your own 5-yard line and you got to go 95 yards to go, and the clock is ticking, I mean, that's true leadership if you can come back from that. How has the pandemic, leading through this pandemic, how has it impacted you? What have you learned? What did you learn? What do you continue to learn?
Well, one of the things I think I would say I've learned is what's important, what really matters. And I think we can easily go through our day to day and we do things because we think we're supposed to, or we've always done it that way. It could be meetings. We've always had certain meetings. We've always looked at certain data, certain information. And it's shown me that some of the things we've always done really aren't that important. And maybe we could unload that baggage. It has reinforced the importance of connection, because I think we haven't been able to connect in so many ways, and humans need to connect. And inside the hospital, we connected. and we were there with each other, leaders, frontline employees, etc. And to be with them, to encourage. The Bible says, therefore, encourage one another and build one another up. And if you ever had an opportunity and a need to do that, it was the past year and a half. But I've learned, some things you let go, and they aren't that important. But the things that are important, communication and being there and listening to, what the needs are. And again, to me, my job is to work for and serve, my 750 employees and make sure that they have what they need every time they step up to do their job. And if they do that, then they can do their job well. But they also have to be able to come to a place every day where they know that they matter, that they're more than just a name badge. They're more than just an employee, that they are a person. They're a person first. And they recognize that I know that they're mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, and they have families, and they live in the same community or type of community that I do. And that's another important thing as a leader, to recognize these aren't just employees, they're people. Our patients aren't just patients with a disease, they're people, and they have a story too. And it's important for us to never forget that and never stop connecting with those people.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because when I listen to you talk, it's obvious that you have a high degree of self-awareness. And Mr. Bill Turner used to tell me all the time, he'd say it publicly, that the most important characteristic of a servant leader is self-awareness. Now, there are two parts to self-awareness as we transition here. Our guest is Don Avery, President and CEO of Fairview Park Hospital in Dublin, Georgia. There's two aspects of self-awareness. Understanding who you are, in other words, how do you see yourself, but also how do other people see you? And I'm really curious about that second part. How do you, in rapid fire motion, as we get ready to close out, how do you think other people see you?
Well, I think they see me as somebody who's willing to take a chance, who's got their back, who's going to support them. I always tell people, if you're right, I'm going to be out there on that limb with you. I'm going to support you. I've got your back. And they need to know that. They need to know that they can be honest with me and call me out. And that takes a while, I think, especially for my leadership team to say, hey, Don, you're wrong on this, or hey, you need to do something a little bit different. Or in some cases, come to me and say, hey, are you okay? I care about you, and that sort of thing. And that's a culture that takes time to build, that kind of culture. But a true leader has to be very intentional about always learning about himself, learning about the environment. You have to be out there and visible and listen. I had someone ask me once, how can you get that department to talk to you? And I said, I just don't leave until they talk, because I want them to know that I really care what they say. I really care about their input on this. So listening to others and creating an environment where they can be honest with you helps me to be aware of them and the organization better than if I just assume I know what's going on out there.
Well, I want to go a step further. Typically, I would ask, how important are assistants? But I know your leadership team, and I know how important they are. I know how important they are. But how important is having a great leadership team in your organization or any organization?
Well, the team is critical, and you can go it alone. But I always say this: I may be right or close to right about something, and let's say I'm moving in a direction that's true north, 360 degrees, true north. Yeah. And in the short term, if I'm off a few degrees, probably no big deal. But in the long term, if I'm off a few degrees and I'm flying an airplane from here to Denver, I'm going to wind up in New Mexico if I'm off a few degrees. So we have to have a team that we trust, that we listen to. And an important thing is, I don't want them to look like me. I want them to all be unique and different and bring different gifts and different skill sets. I don't want to develop groupthink. I don't want to develop, hey, we're all going to do what, Don says, the sky's green, fine, the sky's green. I don't want that kind of team. They need to be able to be who they are. You hire them, let them do their jobs, give them input, and create an environment where they can give you input as well. But that team, and I've been fortunate to have a pretty steady team that hasn't had a lot of turnover, but we're
And
on
a
the same
diverse
page.
team. I mean, when I go to Dublin, one of the things I'm surprised at on your leadership team, a lot of those folks are not from South Georgia.
No, they're not.
I mean, they've been there a while, and I'm thinking a lot of that has to do with you. Whether you say yes it does or not, I'm saying right now a lot of that has to do with you.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think that diversity, we need to reflect the community that we serve to a certain degree,
Mm-hmm.
and we try and bring the best people, and we're diversity from a gender standpoint, from a race standpoint, from a I always kid people in North South. They let me come
Yes,
in
you
as
are.
a Yankee. But that is important because that means people approach situations from a different perspective, and together, hopefully, we come up with better solutions.
Final couple of questions, Don. Are you more of a strategist / tactician, or are you more of a relationship person, or both?
Well, I'm definitely a relationship person. I mean, there's no question. And people say, "Well, I'm a people person." A relationship person is somebody who literally tries to develop a relationship and get to know the people with whom you work or serve, and that means sometimes you go to school events that your kids aren't there, but your employees' kids are there.
Yeah.
You go to funerals and weddings and you get involved. That doesn't mean you get in their business necessarily, but you know them as a person, and so that's a relationship person. If I was to look at strategy and tactics and everything, I'm more of a strategist because that's more of a big picture. I tend to be more of a visionary, big picture person, as everybody around here knows.
And we've seen your emergenetics profile,
Yeah,
so
and
yes.
I'm not a real detail person. I think I recognize when details are or aren't there, but in the grand scheme of things, I'll say, "Hey, we need to do this and move forward, and etc." And somebody will say, "Well, we got to do this and this." I said, "Oh yeah, well, you take care of that stuff." And but again, you have a team that brings different skill sets, and so I can assure you, I will always have members of my team that are very good with organizational skills and the details and the tactics, because you have to have that too. But you also have to have the big picture.
So right now, because of the pandemic, social media helped out a great deal.
Oh yeah.
How is it different leading during the social media era right now? And also, where do you think healthcare is going to be 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, because of all of this technology and what we've learned about being in person versus being virtual and what have you?
Well, I hope we never lose the in-person piece, the relationship piece, that the touching and being connected to people that way. Certainly, social media is here to stay. We'll see it continue to evolve. There's pros and cons about it. I think that there's a lot of people believe everything they read on social media. That's a big negative, because they believe things on social media more than they do the science or technology sometimes. But also, it is a very effective way of getting a message out.
Yes.
You get a broad number of people, get information out to them more rapidly. I think that in some ways you have to be more careful what you say, because it could show up in a place, or people could take sound bites out, and because we are speaking more and writing more and visible more, you have to be more aware of what you're saying and how you're saying it. And that's probably not a bad thing, actually. I do think as the future, we're going to see more telemedicine type work. And we've certainly seen that it works over the past year plus. And I think one of the things that'll give us is maybe more access to a broader number of people of medical information and maybe even diagnosis and treatment in places that don't have it today. And so that's a good thing. I think we'll see more artificial intelligence through this technology. Technology is mostly positive, I think. Again, I just say we can't ever lose, and I hope we never lose, the personal connection and the touch that I think is critical for human relationship.
Well, my final question, Don, and that is this. According to Dr. Tasha Eurich, who wrote a fascinating piece in the Harvard Business Review, one of the things she pointed out was that the least self-aware person in any organization, studies show, is the person at the top. Now, I don't see that in you, But I'm really fascinated about this question and the answer that you gave me last week, and that is, what does Don Avery do to improve his own personal development? I mean, what do you have to improve on?
Well,
Because you're a seasoned veteran.
yeah, but I'm always learning. I always feel like there's something to learn. I ask a lot of questions. I read, as you know, I read a lot. There's no time when I don't have at least 2 books going, one reading and one on audio. And some of those are kind of leadership type things. I go to seminars. I ask a lot of questions, and I get to know other people and what they do and how they do their jobs and such. And I believe that I'll continue to learn until my last breath, because there's so much to learn out there, and there's so much life to live. And I'm also, I think I can be pretty self-deprecating and not take myself too seriously. Sometimes I probably do. But again, listening to others and creating an environment where people will speak truth into my life, I think will constantly keep me aware of where I am, but also keep me constantly learning so I can better serve in whatever capacity God has me in, whether it's a hospital CEO or a teacher or, a coach or a Sunday school teacher, whatever it might be. I want to be the best that I can be for the sake of those I'm serving.
Don, listen, thank you so much for joining me this week on Leadership Matters. I'm one of your biggest fans. I'm a big cheerleader for you. I talk about you in a lot of my workshops because you are the epitome of what a CEO should look like. I mean, you should, if we open up the dictionary, they should put your picture in there. And I mean that sincerely.
You're
because
very kind.
I was there a couple of months after you arrived. And I know what it was like and I know what it's like now. And I'm just a firm believer that as you said earlier, these folks that you've been entrusted to serve, they have families. And for you to create an environment for them to do the best that they can do with the gifts God has given them, I find that just amazing. And I'm indebted to you for them. And I want to thank you so much for joining us on Leadership Matters.
Well, Kelvin, thank you so much. I appreciate being on here, and I thank you for your friendship as well.
Bless you, my friends. Well, that was Don Avery, our guest on Leadership Matters this week. I want you to join me in a couple of weeks when we're going to have another special guest. It's going to be renowned baseball coach. You probably heard of him. It's Bobby Howard. He was somebody just named him the best high school baseball coach of all time. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to find out why. So this is Kelvin Redd. I'm signing off. And as I like to say, define your destiny.